Well, Kevin, we met via LinkedIn because we realized that we had a shared passion, and it's about helping HR people to move forward and be seen as partners in the business. And we came at it from different angles, and we had some really great conversations about it. So we decided that we would video one of our conversations in the hope that it might be interesting and entertaining. So just to warn the audience, we haven't scripted it. We got some thoughts. So, Kevin, where should we start?
So, Deborah, I think first and foremost is thank you. I think you and I have really enjoyed the conversations that we've had thus far. I think it's our opportunity now to take those back of the napkin conversations that we're having and seeing if it's going to be helpful for others in the field or the space. I think you hit the nail on the head that this is both of our passion projects, right? We love the work of HR. We see HR as a vital function within an organization, and we understand the importance of a strong HR department in correlation to their people. So I think through better business practices focused on the people, we too can turn around not only the business community, but also the communities in which we live and serve. So
Yeah.
I would like to understand, because HR has been a function for a long time within these institutions, and I know you've worked in the space for quite some time yourself. Knowing what you know about the history of the function of HR, and you've had some of these very challenging and difficult conversations, how were you building bridges internally with other business units to help break down those silos and really understand the business in which you were working?
Yeah, well, it's interesting looking back because I have to be honest and say I wish I'd known then what I know now. Because in practice, what I used to find, and I know others identify with this, is that you get some stakeholders who really get HR and you get some that don't. And there's a real danger that actually you end up spending all your time working with the ones who you just don't have to work so hard with. So their divisions get all the benefit of your expertise and your support. And actually, it's the person that really needs to understand the value of HR that's missing out on it.
Mhm.
Because I think it's quite difficult sometimes to get it across to some business leaders. And it can be quite frustrating because to somebody in HR, it's really obvious that if you're going to develop somebody, give them some training, if you're going to coach them and support them, that it's going to improve their performance and that is going to improve your relationship with the customer or your ability to sell or market. It just seems a no-brainer to somebody in HR. So I think that might be part of the reason why it doesn't tend to be a natural part of the culture of HR functions to work with hard data.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I love that. And what's funny is, and I think that's one of the most important first steps, right, for any HR practitioner that is trying to become or gain that bigger seat at the table. You have to earn the right? We have to develop those levels of trust. Those internal communications are so pivotal and so important during these types of dialogues, because if you don't even understand where the CEO wants to take the business in the next 3 to 5 years, you and I both know from a talent perspective, you need to start upskilling or reskilling that talent years before that left or right turn is made.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting, do you find it a challenge to get finance professionals themselves to find the correlation between their financial statements and the impact of human capital?
Well, I think that is the area that you and I have been developing because if we think about usually for HR, it comes up, the whole topic comes up when you want to get some budget for something.
Mm-hmm.
So you think, okay, I want to do some leadership development. The budget I need for this is, I don't know, 50 grand. That's not a very big budget, is it? Um, and so the finance guy is going to say, well, what's going to be the return on investment? And for HR to work that out, you've actually got to go back like a few steps because, as you said, it's about the talent you need and the capabilities that you need and the leaders that you need in 2, 3, 4 or 5 years' time. So that's actually what you're beginning to work on right now with that budget. So you do need a long-term view. And I think that the relationship with finance, I've got to be honest, I didn't have one.
Mm-hmm.
You've said before to me, and I think it's so powerful, is have a buddy in finance.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I'd done that because I wasn't great, because I'm going back a bit, because I've been in consultancy now for a long time. So when I think back to my corporate role, it wasn't actually commonly done that you would do that. And now I think, God, that would have been so great. Finance people always seemed a bit scary. And I wasn't great with a spreadsheet. And let's face it, finance is all about spreadsheets and HR is all about people. So you kind of, it's not your comfort zone. So if you could work with somebody in finance who could A, help you understand the numbers that do exist, and B, help you to develop numbers that make complete sense to you. So things like, if you got your staff turnover, I'm going to use a really simple example, but if you've got your retention statistics and you can just draw some kind of connection between those and your profit margin, there might be a correlation. And it's that kind of thing that HR people can get much better at.
Yes, yes. And we've seen it too. So a couple of things, like the SEC is obviously changing here in the United States for publicly traded companies. There's this big push for the global reporting initiative, right? They want to know these workforce and human capital metrics within these organizations, because that tells us very upfront there is a direct correlation between profits and revenue and human capital or culture development. And we're starting to see more of this in the merger and acquisition space. I think in the mergers, that mergers are really slowing down and focusing on the human component first, because those are the most successful transitions of ownership. And when we focus really on our intent, is that we want to either replicate or duplicate the culture that we had, the winning culture and the mindset, but really back to the desired end state. So one of the things that I always say is most important is that developing that internal relationship, like you mentioned. I think one of the most critical pieces of that, and a great place to start for the everyday HR practitioner or professional today, is go co-sponsor the cost of turnover for one HR position or one position in the entire organization. Work on it both from the financial perspective, but also the HR and human capital perspective. And when you co-sponsor that, it is a shared responsibility. You are now building that bridge directly between finance and HR. They now see, they understand it, and they can see on paper what the true cost is. Whether you include soft costs or only focus on hard dollar savings, the whole idea is that these organizations, Deborah, and why data I think is so important, is organizations have been driving in the rearview mirror for the last 35 years with the national accepted accounting practices. This is, again, like driving a car with your rearview mirror, which we would agree probably would be pretty challenging. We might go into the guardrail, we might hit the car next to us because we're only focused on the past. And that's really where we start to leverage the analytics and data, is that to enable HR to now talk in numbers. It's the same evolution that marketing went through in the 90s, and the same evolution that the bookkeepers went through, who now we know are the CFOs, who hold some of the key real estate with the CEO's ear. So if HR now moves in a direction like ISO certifications, or two certifications have come out, SEC is changing, EEO1 here in the United States is ramping up. We're moving more towards a digital age and the importance of being more comfortable, like you mentioned, with data. We may know that this is all fact, right? In HR, we all know if I invest in this person, they should give us a more positive return. But until we can say, to your point, for that $50,000 that we want to invest in this learning and development strategy, we should be able to go to finance and say, for every $1, we're going to get $4 back. And let me show you how that looks.
Yeah.
The challenge is that most HR practitioners or professionals never go back and reassess the effectiveness of learning development strategies. So if they reassess, then they talk to the managers, both pre-engagement and post-engagement, and got a percentage, an agreed percentage of what that revenue increase was due to that learning and development strategy. Now I can start giving that full return on investment directly back to the CEO, just like marketing. If you paid $1 in Facebook ads, we promise we're going to get $10 back. HR now is having that same conversation with the CEO, showing the vital importance of an employee and the human aspect and how important that is. So we're all chasing a path. You and I both mentioned the passion project, right? Why do you think it's so vital right now in today's day and age that HR upskills themselves as a profession?
Well, I feel that we could be at a kind of a tipping point because there have been two or three things that have been said by various people that really make you think HR have got to really grab this. So I did a post this morning because I saw a quote that said, manpower planning is not an HR activity, it's a business activity. And you kind of think, well, it should be both, actually. You do want business to own it. There was something else that you said, which you'd read, which was the IT functions are saying, if HR don't grab HR tech, we're going to do it. And I saw something else that said, where should people analytics sit? Should it be a separate function? All of those things should be in HR. So there's a whole lot of things that we should grab, and they're all strategic. They all help us to make the case for great HR practice. And I think it's important for us to actually bring this down to a really practical level. And you've done some great videos on this.
Thank you.
And I want to actually track the process that you used to take your audience through the thinking and think about actually, where does an HR person start? So coming from this whole kind of big picture of, yeah, we need to do this, hopefully people in the audience are thinking, okay, yeah, let's do it. How do we start?
Yes. Great.
And I think the first thing is to really just quietly and privately get around your organization's numbers. What matters? There's some great questions that I know you're great at asking, Kevin.
Yeah. And some of the ones that I start with, Deborah, is first we have to change our lens, right? We in HR have had this lens that we're here to serve the business, which is true. We're here to serve also the employees, which inherently that's a very challenging place to be in. Depending on the valuation of the CEO putting on human capital and understanding that there is a true return on investment, I have been on my high horse calling it human asset management, because that changes the whole lens, your whole perspective. When you view something instead of a resource as a true asset, it changes your whole attention to the importance of how you treat that particular asset. We've heard, and you've seen it. One of the things that we know in history is that we're in the fourth industrial revolution right now. If we look back to the industrial revolution and up to probably 30 years ago, the GDP, at least of the United States, a majority of our GDP was tangible. It was a product-based economy. We have now shifted so far to a service-based. We don't get free healthcare over here. So our healthcare is a service-led industry, but we try to constantly apply the same principles and practices that we learned in a tangible market to a non-tangible market, where the relationship directly with your employee, with that customer, is vitally important. So the satisfaction, the engagement of that particular employee that's constantly engaging with your customer, how does HR have an impact on customer retention, customer satisfaction? Does that have a decreased budget if my customers are more satisfied? Does that decrease my marketing budget? Probably. If my retention rate of my customers is significantly higher because I have created the culture where people want to live and work in HR, your article that you mentioned, vitally important. Business drives where the business is headed, right? We know we want to be here in 10 years. What I say to HR to take after you've developed these internal relationships with finance and there's a shared understanding and an equal playing field, it is now HR's opportunity to just listen to where the business is headed and then work backwards from a labor perspective, a people perspective, a skills perspective, and KPIs relevant in order to execute on that business plan or strategy, to actually execute the executive leader's plan. And that's how they upskill themselves necessary and the entire workforce necessary so they don't skip a beat. What did we learn during the pandemic more than anything? People required different skills than they were previously ever thought that they would need. I have seen such an advancement, like you said, in technology. Technology is there to enable our success. So I tell HR practitioners and professionals and business leaders, focus on your people, focus on your process, and then your technology. If HR starts getting involved in process itself has a human capital cost, whether it's hard dollars or soft dollars. So the cost of the human capital is realized by finance, but it doesn't show itself on the profit and loss statement. They only see that 70% of their operational budget is going towards human capital. They don't even know what that true return is. And that's HR's opportunity to say, this is the return today. This is how I'm going to have an impact on the bottom line. And this is how I'm going to get you to where you want to be. But the importance is, a lot of people put the cart before the horse, as that saying goes. They are not focused on long-term goals. They're focused in the thrills of the day-to-day environment because they don't have the right people, they don't have the right process, and they don't have the right technology. If 80% of your job is administrative work, how easy of a business decision is that, because you're viewed as a non-revenue generating position, to outsource, leverage bots, and then take advantage of AI? So it's my opinion that we need now more than ever to evolve as a business function, just like marketing, just like bookkeeping, to really evolve and adapt to the new demands of the workforce, because we're now in the fourth generation of the Industrial Revolution, where this is now something that is forthright and right in front of our faces. And 3 out of 5 HR practitioners admit that they need to upskill themselves in order to be a better business partner. How do you do that? You need to raise your business acumen. And I start with 3 steps. And I would love your thoughts on these too, Deborah. How does a business make money? How do we make money? And how do we spend it? Or lose money, sorry. How do we make money? How do we lose money? And where do we spend it? If HR starts thinking in that way, it's going to raise their business acumen. They get to understand the people component related to each of those 3 questions, and then put themselves out there to take ownership of that responsibility from the human capital perspective. What are your thoughts on that? When you were in HR, was that how you were thinking, or have you changed your mindset since you've been out more in the consulting world?
Yeah, I think that talent is a great way of looking at it. If you think about sales people, then that's a great way of looking at it, and you can
I can relate.
transfer that thinking onto other functions. So say, or anybody that manages a customer, then clearly you can create a link between the quality of the salesperson or the surveyor or the consultant or whoever's customer facing. You can create a link between their ability and winning business. And you can also create a negative correlation with losing that business. And also the cost of turnover of staff. That's a really good one for us to be able to quantify, because we know that when we lose a key member of a team, there is a cost. And sometimes it seems a bit woolly, because you think, well, yeah, it's a load of hassle, and we know that we've got lack of continuity. We know that the customer may have really liked that person, but we should be able to turn it into a hard number. And actually, when I look back to my corporate life, I remember once we had a terrible problem with losing salespeople in our French operation. So I went over and I did a little bit of a research project to really understand why were these salespeople leaving. And the answer was actually really straightforward. We were paying behind the market. So I put together a plan and I took it into our European president. And in retrospect, I had it completely back to front, because I went in there and I said, look, we've got this issue with pay. We're losing sales reps. It causes a lot of hassle. And oh, and by the way, we probably lose sales in the process. And
Mhm.
I should have gone in there and said, hey, Mr. European President, I've got a suggestion that's going to increase sales by 2% in France.
Bingo. Bingo.
We've just got to turn it around and start with speaking in their language. Because I know that you and I have talked about that as well, that HR, we have our own language and some of it is jargon. And sometimes it can turn business leaders off so much that they never even bother to work out what it means. So we've got to actually speak business language, and whether it's retaining customers, whether it's, for example, if we talk about performance and developing capabilities of the talent that we've got, it means that you can, for example, meet your project targets. When you've got capable people, you can meet your project targets. If you haven't, and you've got a performance issue with one of them halfway through, or you lose them halfway through, you're going to miss your deadline. So there are some really practical connections that we can make.
Mhm. Mhm.
And going back to the steps that you explore in your videos, and I thought about afterwards, and I was thinking, okay, how can HR people, how can we help HR people to make this really easy
Mhm. Yeah.
and build a picture that will make real sense to them? And I think the first thing is to get their head around it themselves, maybe with the help of somebody in finance. So say you've got a particular client group, which most HR people have. How does this client group really work? How do they get their sales? What do they spend their budget on? Where does it leak?
Mhm.
What is the real impact of their talent? What do they contribute, and what's it cost when you lose them? And really get your head around that, and then go and talk to somebody in the team and just ask them, how does this really work? What does worry you? You know, what keeps you awake at night? And get them talking in their business language, and not even move to the HR agenda. Just keep soaking up the information that they're giving you and the language that they're speaking in. And the next stage would ideally be to work out your measures together, which takes me back to what you were saying earlier about actually co-sponsoring some of the measures so that you're sharing accountability for them.
Mhm.
So people can't say this is an HR problem,
Mhm.
because most HR problems aren't HR problems. Usually they're management problems,
Mhm.
but actually they need to share accountability for them.
Agreed. What does every HR practitioner complain about? We don't own culture and we don't own employee turnover, right? They don't want responsibility or accountability for that because of the perception that it will make them look bad, and it's out of their control, right? So we know the key stakeholders, the board and the CEO, where they want the company. Maybe it's 10% year over year growth. And now I go have a conversation. Well, what are our challenges? What are the hurdles? What are we going to need? A lot of the challenges that the business leaders will share with you. Well, we can't keep customers. We keep losing customers at this rate, and we're only acquiring them at this rate. If you, as an HR practitioner, are listening and hearing, focus on how many of the business challenges are related to people. And we in HR, as human resources, are the beholders of those people, right? So if we focus on the process, which drains resources in most cases when they're ineffective and inefficient, those are resources drained from the bottom line of the business itself. Do we have too much staff? Are we overstaffed? If we put in this piece of technology or this type of AI, how many other more revenue generating positions could we create? It's a reallocation and a re-envisioning of the function of HR as a true business partner. It's understanding that that business challenge that I just heard come out of the operations mouth is, how do I relate that back to a people perspective? What are the leading and lagging indicators that will either tell me we're on track or we're off track and adjustments need to be made? And that is why I love workforce analytics and data and people information. And the reason, Deborah, that I think we're not there yet is, and I'll say it, there's some institutions out there that continue to put HR in that box. We have seen now an advancement in technology at such an exponential rate that we're unaware of the data, the gold that these systems are now collecting for us. It was not there before. So it's almost like finding gold. Now, some can view certain metrics as fool's gold. They think it's important, right? You mentioned earlier, we have this perception in HR that everybody else should get it. It should be as basic as that. What is challenging in that thought is that is where HR, they don't have the time in that 80%, if they're administrative, only 20% strategic, to come up with listening from their actual employees and their people to actually formulate the strategies necessary in order to get the business to where they want to be. Not only today, but tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that perception and that thought, right? Just like leaders, and some of that compensation study that you said, he probably said that's bananas. That's ridiculous. I don't care about that. But if you start saying, well, it's cost us X, if we lose that 20% of our workforce that's doing 80% of the revenue, it is going to have a dramatic impact. These are the key stakeholders within the organization that we need to satisfy and we need to keep a part of, maybe chart out their long-term path within the institution. Why did people get into HR, Deborah? Why did you specifically get into HR? I don't think it was the data movement. I don't think it was collecting I-9 verifications. I don't think it was taking information from an application and then ingesting it into a system. I think if we go back and focus on our why we got into HR, it was for the people. But when we got into the throes of the day-to-day, the processes were broken, the people had different initiatives and different goals, and the technology was not there enabling our success. It was actually disabling us. It is really limiting on what we perceive as the value that we can add. But when you see the future and you focus on why you're doing what you're doing, it allows us to then understand how do we become better business partners. Mr. CEO, you thought that rewards and recognition program was why people were staying. Well, we challenged that. We tested that hypothesis. And actually what we found, it is actually our benefits package of why people are staying within this organization. Are our benefits is our employee satisfaction with our benefits offering? Is that 76%? How do we get that to grow another 22%? What other things can we offer outside of, in the United States, pet insurance that is going to move the needle so we don't have to hire outside recruiting firms to hire every position? That we in HR can upskill the workforce in the time necessary so we don't have disruptions. The magic target and what happens is, and what we saw during the pandemic, is the rapid upskilling needs that the pandemic brought, which caused, if 80% of my workforce or 90% of my workforce needs to upskill at the exact same time, what does that do? Makes us less productive. It eats into the bottom line of the organization, and we're less profitable. If we saw that coming 18 months before, and granted it was a pandemic, but even at the thrills of the pandemic, the first 3 months, instead of the CEO driving off of the rearview mirror of a financial statement that was totally disrupted because they didn't even know what tomorrow was going to bring, how nice would it have been HR going into Mr. CEO and saying, look, this is where I think we can save money. These are the positions that are vital for our success. Before the pandemic, it took us 180 days to backfill these positions. Post-pandemic, we're not sure, but you could probably extend that period. So I would not get rid of this headcount. I would focus on this area. Instead of, they focus on their highly compensated staff, the more seasoned, tenured staff that have not only social capital, intellectual capital. And then they just let that walk out the door because it was a short-sightedness. And that's where I think, Deborah, that we can now become, it's just viewing it from a different lens. How can I help the business? and how do I take care of the people to execute that business and grow revenue. And that's why I talk about flipping from a cost center to a profit center.
Yeah. And I know that that then is about how do we help HR people to quantify the value that they add, that they create. So sometimes we are creating value by developing talent. So that's if
Not
you
only
could.
from now, how do you view that? Do you view that as only a performance metric?
Well, for me, let's just reel it right back in for a minute into the interactions between the HR person and the line manager or leader.
Mm-hmm.
Because coming back to those retention figures that everybody would agree is, if we've got real talent, we really, really want to keep them. And most people actually leave a manager rather than a company.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you say you've got some data that says people leave because of salary, and I'm surprised at that, because very often it's actually because they're just getting repeatedly fed up with their manager in various meetings, and they think, right, I'm off. And maybe the job that they go to happens to have more money, but if their manager had given them the support that they needed when they needed it, then they probably wouldn't have minded the fact that their pay was a bit lower. So those conversations that HR have with line managers are absolutely critical. And one of the things that really came through during the pandemic was the support that HR people were giving to line managers every single day to help them to consult with their people about, like, are you going to work from home? What kind of problems have you got? How are you? And actually find out about their mental health, and so many really, really important conversations that kept the business going. So there was a lot of business continuity work going on that's really difficult to quantify, but
Mm-hmm.
it should be possible.
Correct. If we're focusing on the right areas. Yes.
And also, the other thing during the pandemic that we learned was that a different kind of leader really began to shine. So the kind of leader that had developed trust before the pandemic was actually much better at maintaining it through a screen once they started working remotely than the kind of leader who actually hadn't really built trust before, but was managing to kind of create an image that they were really effective. They were probably better at managing upwards than they were at managing downwards. And so that too is something, especially if you're in L&D, you want to be able to quantify the impact of engagement on productivity and therefore on profit.
Correct.
So that there is some great data now, so that you can get generic data that says the companies who have the top quartile of engagement also have the top quartile of productivity, and there's also a connection with profit. So you can get generic data. I think the real value for HR people, though, comes when they can create that data so that they are really talking about their own business.
Mm-hmm.
So when we retain people, we know that we retain customers.
Mm-hmm.
Or if we know that this particular intervention that I want you to invest in, the budget would be 1% of sales, 1% of revenue, then let's make sure that it actually delivers an increase in revenue. And because usually the intervention is only part of the solution. So it's like you go on a training course, and if the line manager doesn't support the learning when the person gets back to the office or not now, then you don't get the real benefit. You don't get the real return on investment from the intervention. So the partnership in creating the numbers together
Mhm.
can really reap rewards when you're then quantifying the results afterwards.
And holding yourself accountable.
Yeah.
Yes.
And whose budget should it be anyway? Because if it's the line manager's budget or that function's budget, then they've got more of a vested interest in making sure that they do get the improvement in performance from the training.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's quantifying that. And I think that we, like you said earlier, it's like we know this, right? We've been in the field, we've run research. 22% of businesses leverage data and science to make business decisions. There was another article that 70% of CFOs were going to continue to trust their gut instinct and intuition to make business decisions. So how do we force them out of that? How do you force change? It's the desired end state or where we want to go. But culture, as we know, is a constant evolution. Things are changing. Things are happening. What was disrupted? Now everybody's focused, like you said, mental health. Everybody wants to focus now on mental health because that's a hot key button item. Do a lot of these organizations even know if their employees specifically are having mental health issues? Have they quantified that? Have they understand like what perception or what people they're actually going through? And I think you touched on it earlier, right? And I always give this the ivory tower, right? How many lines of people are there from the CEO to the frontline employees? Because that's an important step to look at. If there's multiple tiers, HR needs to be the moderator or the facilitator of all the communication between those multiple silos.
Mm.
The importance of HR and the importance of people and the importance of understanding them as an individual. What motivates that manager? What motivates that CEO? What motivates that CFO? If the CEO is held accountable by the board or the key stakeholders, what do they want? They want to look good. They want revenue. So enabling HR to now talk in the international language of numbers, it now enables us to have a different conversation and a different perspective. If the CEO and the CFO came from the Industrial Revolution era where it was a tangible asset, their view of people is bodies, right? It's how fast can we get the product out the door? How fast can we get our the patient in and out? That is what they've quantified because that's what they believe. Until you challenge that in numbers and fact, their thoughts and their growth and what they do internally will continue to grow and fester. One of the questions that I always like to ask to get CEOs to really think, Mr. CEO or Mrs. CEO, for the 70% of your operational budget that you are investing today in your people, what is that return on investment? Want to see some blank stares? You want to see some I don't knows? Ask that question. Now, what's funny, Deborah, is you ask that same CEO and CFO, what is your raw production to final product waste percentage? They know that at like the back of their hand. They say, oh, I got that one. Now, Mr. CFO, what is your cost of turnover? Back to our conversation. Oh, I don't know that. So the perception is the lower I get my raw waste percentage, the more profitable you are. Not knowing the human component of that is fascinating. And that's why I love the co-sponsoring, because the co-sponsoring, if we want a shared responsibility for culture and we want a shared responsibility for turnover, go co-sponsor some things and show it in a monetary. Once it's in monetary and they can see the negative impact, it changes how quickly they're willing to adjust and change, alter their view or their lens.
Yeah.
The other challenge, if CEOs are driving the ship and they do not value HR because there is no relationship with HR, how can you tell me that that doesn't permeate down the ladder to all those levels of managers?
Yeah.
Why you constantly have this inherent conflict between, instead of working together, breaking down the silos and listening to the business challenges in each of those segments within the organization.
Yeah.
And those are just, that is like the quintessential change of view of HR, but we can't get there by sitting on our high horse and just preaching about it, right? Here's the facts. Here's a Harvard Business Review. Here's the recent article in HBR. Show it with their numbers and watch how quickly their view of HR changes and their
Yeah.
view or perception of people now as a true asset to the business that is going to make the business more profitable. And all of those other business challenges that we had, what KPIs are we going to now monitor in HR to ensure that we're either trending above or below in real time, and watch in real time and data and analytics and workforce to tell us what is happening, why it's happening, how do we adjust, and where precisely do we invest the dollars necessary with more precision instead of that spray and pray method that everybody's taking right now because the roof's on fire. Nobody knows what to do. Everybody's panicking. But if you're that voice and saying, hey, let's really go back to the basics. If we take care of our people, they're going to take care of our profits. Where do you want to go? Where do you see us? And then let's figure out how we work our way backwards in order to get us to where we want to be. And I think it's really just putting ourselves out there. We're uncomfortable because HR, again, is the hand slappers, the party planners, the redheaded ugly stepchild of the business. Myself, if we think about what motivates HR, what does HR want most, Deborah? They want to be heard. They want to be listened to. So the skills that you bring from your consultancy and what my passion project is, like I know it is yours, how do we upskill HR to get that bigger seat at the table? Now, there's conflicting. People are like, HR has that seat. They just don't do anything with it. It's different having a seat at the table on an equal playing field and actually being listened to and heard. If you're in the room table and no one's listening to you and they don't think you're important, then you might as well not even be at the table. But if we can upskill you and prepare you on to how to drive these business conversations and what to listen for and how we can get you to where you want to be, and enable HR, to your point, to enable their success, is they want to be listened, heard, and valued. So if we tap into that, and that's what you want, and you got into HR for the people, let us show you how to get to where you want to be.
Yeah, so we've got an and there. We've got, you can do HR the way you like to do it because it's about people. And also you can develop the business acumen so that you're really credible when you go into that room. Because I know I shared with you a survey that we did on HR's reputation, and it really clarified that dilemma that you've just brought up, which is how do we enable HR people to be business savvy without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? They've got to care. The business needs somebody who cares. They need somebody that you can go to when you've got a problem, and also be somebody that really understands the business. You don't have to choose between the two, because as you said earlier, there is a deep motivational issue, because that isn't why most people come into HR. If they wanted to be numbers people, they'd go into finance. So we've just got to make it easy for them, Kevin.
Yes. And I think again, focusing on the desired end state, we want to end wars and we want to bring up our communities in which we live and serve. The better the business takes care of the employees. We can't wait for the government to do it for us. It starts with businesses and it starts with leaders. And I think you touched on it earlier. Building that level of trust is the first fundamental building block of any great culture or any great company. If I don't trust my peers, if I don't trust my direct manager, and I don't trust senior leadership, what is tying me to that business? Nothing. And that's exactly why we're seeing this mass exodus of people, because I jokingly say, we're modeling ourselves after you, Deborah, the UK, the European Union, where you guys work to live instead of live to work like we had in the United States. You guys have
I wish
holidays.
that was true.
You guys have holidays, right? A month. You're like pretty much told, like, take this time off. Where us, like, I'm a father. I'm expecting my wife's going to be induced next week.
Whoa.
You feel guilty taking time off. And why is that? That is a perception that in order to attain the American dream that we're so affiliated and tied to our jobs. But in the United States and globally, we all had a taste of that forbidden fruit, right? The thing that corporate America never wanted us to taste. We saw what was previously told to us as impossible. You will never work from home. You will never do that. Then become possible. That is the same idea and same principle of religion. When you start seeing things become impossible possible, you become a believer. And now what we have is a workforce demanding, say, hey, if that was possible, what other things can we get you to do? Because we understand our value to you is great. And we
Yeah.
now understand that we're in the driver's seat and we have
There
that
is
little
a
bit of power.
there's a rebalancing, isn't there? So these corporations who are saying, there was one yesterday, we will have everyone back in the office during,
Flat
it's
dad, I
not
was
going to
gonna say,
happen.
I saw it too. I saw it too.
You
Yep.
cannot force it anymore because people have proved that they can work from home. So there is a rebalancing of power.
Oh yeah. And how many of those organizations, Deborah, if we really look back and we can be kings and queens of surveys, right? How many organizations are asking their employees, what would you guys want? Oh, we would really like 3 days at home, 2 days in the office. Now, how great is that the CEO gets up there, either he's disconnected, his HR department is so disconnected from their people in the business, or he's so disconnected with the frontline workers who are paying his paycheck, whether he likes to see that or not. They do not feel like their opinion is valued. And they said, we want 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. Okay, everybody, we're bringing you all back 5 days a week. What does that tell you? That doesn't tell you that you value those people's opinions and their value that they bring back to the organization. It's, this is how I think. This is what I believe. No one has challenged me on this. I haven't seen how our productivity has increased. If HR was willing to go and say, hey, Mr. CEO, now, before we do that, right, before you roll that out, understand that X amount of percentages of people said they want this. You're saying you're going the complete opposite. I can promise that we're probably going to lose 15% of our people when you say that.
Mm.
Do
And
you
they're
think
likely to be the most valuable talent because those will be the ones that can move most easily.
correct?
People are just going to be so mobile going forward that organizations can't dictate anymore. So, as you say, if you start asking people, you've got to listen to them and then you've got to show that you've listened to them. And what HR leaders are saying at the moment is they do know that, yes, it's going to be hybrid working, but it's going to take quite some time to work out what that actually means. It's probably going to be personalized solutions
Mhm.
for various people, and the implications of that are massive. So it's going to take quite some time to actually work this through. And it's going to take consultation. It's going to take respect, so that if you show you respect your people while you're adapting to this new future, then you're going to maintain trust with them
Correct.
and keep them. So it's quite a critical time, I think, this next few months.
I agree. I agree. And I think it's our opportunity in HR because managers and senior leadership relied so heavily on HR. This is our pivotal moment. You can choose to stay left or right. What path are you taking? Are you taking the path of least resistance, the least change, the least disruption? Then continue to do the tactical administrative function within HR.
Yeah.
If you want to be a business leader, if you want to be heard, if you want to be listened, we as HR practitioners need to upskill ourselves in workforce analytics, data, process, AI, bots, understanding the gig economy. That is how we start to understand and evolve and adapt our workforce to match and mirror the needs from a budget perspective, but also a performance perspective on where we're headed. And like you said, if we do have this work from home environment, why hasn't HR been working on formulating the right processes, the right technology, and getting the right people in place in order to execute that? If that's what their
They probably
employees
have.
want,
I'm always
some,
going to stick up for HR.
yes,
They
no,
probably
but
have.
some
And
have and some
also,
haven't.
it varies so much.
Correct.
So from between different sectors and different HR functions, there's a huge amount of variety. And I just want to take it back to the relationship bit that is my favorite subject. As well as all the data and working out that statistical and financial framework, the way you actually make things change is through the relationship between HR and the business. And it happens conversation by conversation.
100%.
And to get HR people out of the reactive cycle that I know some of them absolutely hate, and it just feels like you're stuck in it because you kind of think, well, if only I had time to coach this line manager, then he wouldn't come back to me 6 times a year with the same problem. But you're so busy, it feels like a difficult choice to make. And we mentioned HR tech earlier. That's got to be part of the solution, to just keep getting rid of the stuff that you can and automate it. But then if HR are having these conversations with business leaders and managers at all levels, then you really can shift the way that the organization sees HR and how it relates to it.
And I always say strategy with technology is how you maximize that true return on investment. Technology with no strategy limits what the purpose of the technology even was in the first place. So fascinating conversation as always, Deborah. I love having this dialogue with you. You and I could talk, I think, for the next 10 hours about this because we know where the world's headed. We see it right in front of our eyes, and we're constantly trying to get people through what's happening in the next 2 to 3 years. And I believe, and I know this is our passion project, but hopefully everybody enjoyed today's discussion. I had an absolute blast with you, Deborah. Hopefully more to come, and hopefully everybody finds this valuable. And maybe next time we'll dive into a little bit more of the specifics, but I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this with you.
Great. It's really always great talking to you, and we bring different perspectives.
Exactly. And I think that's the key from the whole conversation that we heard. It's changing or altering, but listening, closing your mouth, listening, and adjusting on the fly as to what perspective you need to apply and when.
So next time we'll get more practical.
Let's do it.